Welcome to City University of Seattle's doctoral residency. In this module, we'll cover chapters 4 and 5 of your dissertation. Now, in a 5-part dissertation, we've covered the main 5 chapters of introduction, literature review, and methodology, and now we're going to talk about the results and discussion. But 5 parts, they are all interrelated, though each of them are unique. Now, the way that chapter 4 and 5 ties together is that, remember, chapter 1, 2, and 3 are chapters that you do prior to getting your data. You write up your introduction, you do your literature review, and then you do your methodology section. Once that's approved, that proposal, that goes to IRB, and IRB finally gives you the green light. Now, you've captured your data, whether that is statistical data or it's qualitative data, as in interviews and such, or document analysis, whatnot. So you have all these mounds of data. How do you make sense of it, and how do you write it up? You found some interesting things, perhaps in your study, but now it's a matter of writing it up. And we've mentioned in the course of the residencies that you can talk about your dissertation and explain it well to your chair and perhaps to your committee as well, but at the same time you have to write this as a document that someone who's reading it for the first time can understand. And so chapter 4 and 5, the same thing. So here, chapter 4 and 5, remember that chapter 4 is in detail the findings, just the findings and the analysis. So not necessarily a full analysis or discussion, but we'll talk about that, what that looks like. And chapter 5 talks about the findings, the importance, and meaning and significance. So chapter 5 is the discussion about chapter 4. If you look at the chart here, there's a way to think about this. Chapter 3 is how do you address the question. Remember, we're talking about the problem statement, which leads to the purpose, and then the research question or research questions. Chapter 3 is about how do you address the question. That's the research question. Now, how does chapter 4 and 5 tie into that? Chapter 4 is what's the answer to the question? Tell me just the answer. And then chapter 5 is what was interesting about the answer to the question based on what chapter 2 said. Remember, your literature review is an argumentative piece that showed the gaps in the literature and showed why you need to do your study. Well, chapter 3 tells you what you're going to do. Chapter 4 was the results, and then chapter 5 really ties in using the results from chapter 4, how it's tied into chapter 2. And then finally, what new research questions should this study ask? What new questions? What future directions of research? So that's how they're all tied together. It's this, related document, but yet each stands out on its own. Now, chapter 4, Dragnet, for you classic TV fans, it was a show back in the 50s or 60s, I believe, and Joe Friday was one of the characters who said, "All we want are just the facts, ma'am. Don't give me anything else, just tell me the facts." It was a cop detective show and very popular. Chapter 4 is about that. So how do you organize this? You don't want opinion on here because the less facts you have, the more opinion is going to come out. So in chapter 4, the way you organize it is that you restate the problem statement and purpose statement. You also talk about and discuss the research questions, meaning that you just restate them, remind people what was the purpose of the study. The organization and arrangement of ideas is logical and easy to follow, and the nature of the design and methodology will determine how you will present the data. So in chapter 4, do not discuss the literature. Save that for chapter 5. So just the facts in chapter 4, okay? Always, always, always check your data. Make sure your data is the star of the show in chapter 4. So how it actually looks on paper and the flow of things is you want to begin with the introductory paragraph, as I mentioned, and then include a summary of the statistical characteristics, describing the population, describing the data set. So in a qualitative study, describe your participants, the demographics. There were 15 men, 15 women. There were 6 left-handed people and 20 right-handed people. This was done at a particular location, in time, in space, and in August of 2017, whatever it is, include those summary statistics. So because qualitative people feel that I'm just doing all words. What do I have to do this? Well, that's important to do. If you were doing a quantitative study, you would of course include all these different things like the N, the number of participants, etc. You want to use your tables, charts, and figures in this chapter as well. So most of the chapter 4 is going to have, if you have these charts and figures, going to occur here. Now, quantitative studies get results. Qualitative studies draw findings. So the results of the quantitative studies are just the data. What does the data say? What do they say about the question? What did you find from, what did you gather? What's the result? Qualitative studies, on the other hand, look for patterns and themes, etc. So they're equivalent there. What you want to do, how to organize this, is you want to use section titles regardless of how you organize it. And we'll talk about organization because you can organize it based on themes, sub-themes, research questions. That's the specific way you organize it is going to be between you and your chair, but the key is using section titles so it makes coherent sense. Now, in qualitative studies, they typically range from 25 to 45 pages in length in the chapter 4. In a quantitative study, roughly about 15 to 25 pages. And again, these are rough estimates. What you do not want is a 50 or more page chapter 4. I had worked with a dissertation student that had a, I think, 65-page chapter 4 and a 70-page chapter 5, and I just thought, that's way too much. Because what had happened was the student started discussing the findings in chapter 4 and why they're important and the implication, and I reminded the student, no, your purpose is just to relay the facts. This was a qualitative study that the person did, and the whole key was just show me the data. Use block quotes. So again, data in qualitative are words. Data in quantitative are numbers. You will discuss interpretations later, what this means and why it's important in chapter 5. Now, again, including demographics, some of the descriptive data. You're going to include, if it's applicable, age, gender, describing the sample. You want to summarize the demographics and present them in a table. I think that's a good thing to do, unless you do maybe an autoethnography, which you'll likely not do. But summarize the demographics, identify the data collection process and how the data was tracked. So it was logs, was it reflective journals? I used in-depth interviewing. You want to organizing the findings by the research question or the themes. So whether you organize by research question or theme, that's between you and the chair, but again, use headings. Discuss any validity and ethical issues that came about. But remember, no matter what you do, the data is the star. Your voice and your opinion does not count because the data is the one that's going to lead the dance, so to speak. So themes are things that emerge from the data, and they should be presented in a way that addresses the research questions. Themes emerge from coding, and so when you have, for example, in a qualitative study, you have all these transcripts. So remember, you do all the interviews, for example, in a phenomenology, let's say, and you interview 20 people, and those interviews are an hour to an hour 15 minutes each. From those interviews, you transcribe them. The transcripts are about maybe 3 to 5 pages each one. Again, it's a lot, but then you start analyzing them. You look at words, you look at pattern, you look at meaning, you look at where words happen to occur in a certain question or time or whatnot. So that's all thematic. You'll start recognizing patterns. Remember when we talked about analysis? That's what you're doing here. You want to identify themes. It's based on the what or who is being studied, and then summarize the themes, or sometimes the sub-themes, add the counts and percentages in a narrative format. So for example, 15 out of the 20 people that were interviewed said that leadership and finances are important to good organizations. So you can summarize that, and then you provide the data. So the other thing is, do not identify the participants Do not write anything that could identify the participants. Research question 1, research question 2, etc. If it's embedded in there that you can find out who it is, make sure it's changed. Sometimes I use pseudonyms. You could do that. You could use one respondent said, one person said. Keep it generic, okay? Because it's the data, it's not the person that are important. Remember, if you are in a qualitative study, providing the data in block text. So there's certain rules in APA. If a quote is over a certain number of words, then you use the block format, which is indented a couple inches on each side in a block. If it's less than a certain number of words, then you can include that quote in the conversation, or sorry, in the paragraph. Okay, that has to be included. Now, that's qualitative. Let's talk about quantitative. Quantitative results are straightforward because the data are the numbers. Most of the stuff you do in a quantitative study is what's known on the front end, so that once you do the analysis, you get what you get and you have your discussion. Okay, the descriptions and demographics are narratives, and this whole section of Chapter 4 is much shorter than qualitative because it's straight up data. So here's an example. You want to introduce the demographics, again, descriptive data, that kind of thing, age, gender, population. Summarize the demographics and present this in a table. You can include this in an appendix as well. So I've seen it either way. It can be in the back or it can be in Chapter 4. That's up to you. Here's one that you see, number of students represented by the study by departments. And so it looks like the study was something that they looked at different departments at a university. The big N is the total population. The little n, the n is how many they sampled or got the data from, and shows you the percentage between what their respondents were and the total possible population that produced an n at the bottom left of 318. Okay, so again, straightforward data. If you have multiple groups, then this is a good way to put that in there. Now, how you actually talk about the evidence, the results of your quantitative analysis is important. You want to present the results of statistical tests, including any p-values. And that p-value, if you remember statistics, it's to show statistical significance. And depending upon what the p-value was, you can either reject or accept the null hypothesis. Okay. You want to describe the tests that were chosen and used and why were they used. You want to describe the data collection instrument. So for example, here in Chapter 4, the test was based on Cous's imposters leadership practices inventory, which is a test of so on and so forth that measures this. Okay. You want to analyze each research question and hypothesis, and then you want to report the outcomes of the hypothesis testing. So what did the research reveal, and to what extent the results support what is found in the literature. Okay, are the results different from the literature? And then, of course, discuss any validity and ethical issues. So again, remember, this is just the facts. Okay. You want to present the results of each test, and when I say each test, if you do one test, that's great. If you do multiple tests, you have to do this multiple times. Okay, present the results of each test in statistical format, along with tables and charts, using section titles related to each hypothesis. Use tables to simplify otherwise text-heavy sections that have lots of numbers. So remember, you are trying to convey in Chapter 4, the results to a reader who may not have seen this before or are reading it for the first time. So you want to be as clear as possible. You want it to be simple. You don't want it to be misunderstood. Be sure to report the test value and the p-value. Okay? So here's an example. The study of senior high school students' intentions to pursue post-secondary education used an independent samples t-test, there it is, to determine the difference on intention between male and female students. See Table 2, more stuff. The results indicated, and so on and so forth. So again, if you see here on this example, they mention the type of test, they mention the results, and if there's more data that are associated with this, then you want to do that as well. Include that in a appendix or table. Regarding tables, you want to make sure you include in the title what it means. So, Table 2, Independent Samples T-Test for Students' Intention by Gender. So in the title of the table, again, this is APA stuff. Talk about what the table represents and is it clear? Is it in the table that it's clear to understand? So you see the t-test, standard deviation, mean, etc. Okay. Now, should you use a table or should you not use a table? Use a table to simplify things that would be dense. If you have lots of numbers, it's probably better to put it in a table than embed it in a paragraph. Describe why the test was chosen, why this test for this specific research question. You want to describe the data collection instrument and include reasons why anything missing could not be collected. Well, maybe the students were unavailable for taking the survey. I don't know. Whatever it is, include that. You want to analyze each research question and then report the outcomes of hypothesis testing. Again, APA format, it is key. All this to say, regardless of which methods you choose, these outcomes or these findings, these results in Chapter 4, you summarize them and interpret them in relation to the importance to the research questions. In other words, regardless of the method, summarize them according to the research questions. Because if you find stuff that's interesting that has nothing to do with your research question, that's interesting stuff, but it has nothing to do with your study. So why is it in there in the first place? This happens a lot. It seems that once students start finding data, they start looking for data and find all these different things that are cool and interesting, but that may be interesting, but stick to the task of answering the research question or research questions. That's what your dissertation is about. So Chapter 5. This is about asserting your findings and discussing the literature. So summarize the background, the problem, purpose, and research questions at the beginning. You'll see that dissertations are repetitive. The beginning of each chapter is like a recap. So if you think of the serial TV episodes, it's, on the last TV episode we did this, and it summarizes stuff. So that's what the introduction to each chapter does. But think about who would care about these results. So you're writing a little bit persuasively now. Here's a basic outline. You want to do the recap again. You want to discuss the findings quickly, and then talk about implications for practice. What's the importance for this population? Why is this important? You want to talk about future research. Now that you've done the study, hey, there's some opportunities to replicate the study in maybe a different country or a different context or with a different population. And then final thoughts. This is your point, your nail in the coffin, so to speak. The final strong take-home message. And your Chapter 5, I've never seen it less than 10 pages. 25 is about right. Again, if you write a 65 or 70-page Chapter 5, that's too much. Great, that's too much. Always link your findings to the literature. So this is great information, but so what? The so what is going to be answered by linking it to the literature, because remember, your dissertation now will be part of this tradition of research. It's going to be part of the literature. It's going to add to the research literature. In general, you can organize it with the same section titles. So you're going to see that Chapter 4 and 5 are organized very similarly. For each finding result, provide a paragraph or two of discussion and link it to the literature. Confirming and contradicting data are thoroughly discussed. Were there any surprises? Did it surprise you that this result was the way it was? The finding was what it was. Address how the study informs the practice. And so again, what's the the application to leadership, for example. What's the application for business? Why does it even matter for leaders or for business folks to know this stuff? So you got to make a statement here. This is the persuasive piece that I've done all this stuff. Here's why it's important and why you should take note. The future research is a good place to start if you are struggling for a topic or just thinking about what's the right direction to start in the first place. It's about possible research avenues that are needed based on the findings of your study, not other studies. Your study, what are some things that you could do in the future? This is a section that's required in the dissertation, and you see it just about in every dissertation as well. What could we do for the future? Because some ideas that you can do is you can change a population. Maybe you can do a study in a different area or a related study with a different subject. Same sort of methodology, for example. Note the areas that were not found and then add some ideas that you could do for future studies. Now, final tips. A common pitfall is that discussing Chapter 5 does not tie into Chapter 4. In other words, they're sort of separate. They don't relate to each other. There's no story arc for you movie fans. There should be a common theme, a common thread that you're seeing, and so 4 and 5 should be related. The way to resolve this, and an easy way to do it, is you just use the headings. Use most of the headings from Chapter 4 in Chapter 5. Again, the constant thread are replicated throughout Chapter 4 and 5. And make sure before you send it on forward to a higher level of review that the APA, all the editing, grammar, the writing, the content is perfect. Now, when you've done all this, you're ready to go. You're ready to do the oral defense. And the oral defense is kind of like Anakin here in front of the Jedi Council. You are going to present your findings. It's a quick 15 to 20 minute presentation, and then you are grilled with questions from your committee and from others. So you have your chair, your committee. You will have 2 readers who are external to the department usually, or external to your committee. They're typically from the university that will be there, present. They're the ones reading it. So I think a good litmus test is to make sure that the readers understand your study. The director of dissertation research will be there as well. The dean makes an appearance, sometimes the provost even. And then other guests, your family, your friends, your dog, whoever else. The key is to be prepared and to know the format ahead of time. I've been in defenses where they've lasted really long and there's just no expectation for what it's going to be like. So if we give these expectations ahead of time and you know your parameters, that helps quite a bit. You could do a presentation, PowerPoint, have handouts. What's the key thing that you want people to know from this? You've done this exercise in research that has taken months, sometimes years, and now it culminates in one day of presenting. Well, what do you want people to know? What do you want them to take away? What's the main thing, if you never get to see them again, that you want them to know from you and your study? And also, how are you going to disseminate this? I mean, what are you going to do to not just do this dissertation, but to make sure the results or the findings improve the world? Okay, you want to rehearse your presentation, and do take care of yourself. Get a good night's rest. I know in my dissertation, I rehearsed for a couple days. Took a day. I walked through. I took a break and walked through again, and I walked around and just sort of acted as if like a dress rehearsal. I did this. So by the time I got to the defense, I was tired because I had rehearsed so extensively that I knew this thing in the back of my mind. I knew what anecdotes to use. I knew what stories to fill in. I knew what jokes to tell to start off, to gauge. So that's the thing. I even went to the room prior to, like a few days before my defense, and I walked around and I got accustomed to the smell, the sounds, the sights of the room. I knew where I was going to stand. I knew what window I would point at. I knew what where people would be seated, and I went through with in my mind, just walking through this room. I tested the equipment to make sure it was working. All that stuff, all the little logistical pieces, I worked through. The key is that you are the expert. Nobody has ever climbed this mountain that you have, and you are here to talk about your journey. Know that everybody wants you to succeed. This is not a time that the committee wants to trip you up to test, let's test if this person's a good researcher or not. Go in confidently knowing that you are a good researcher and you know what you know about your topic because you did the work. You got the data. So, Chapter 4 is factual. Chapter 5 is interpretive. It's implications. You want to organize according to your research questions and link your research, especially Chapter 5, to Chapter 2. You want to provide some future direction and tie it all together with a strong conclusion, the memorable thing that people will take when they look back on this event. So at this point, I'm going to open it up for an open discussion of questions, ideas, but I do want to thank you for watching this presentation, and I look forward to seeing you soon.